Welcome to the McCombs Leadership Forum, a conversation with today's leaders about contemporary leadership issues. I'm George Gow, host of the forum, and a professor and former dean in the McCombs School of Business. The purpose of these forums is to help our students better understand the joys and challenges of leadership. This forum is part of a course I teach in the McCombs School of Business entitled Contemporary Leadership Issues, examining both leadership and ethics. Here with us today are students from my class, as well as other students from the McCombs School. And later in the forum, they'll have an opportunity to ask questions of our guests. Over the 30 years that I've been an academic, I've had a chance to observe many university leaders. And I could say that our guest today is the one I admire most. Joining us today is a UT alum and former president of the University of Texas, who now serves as president of the Houston Endowment, Dr. Larry Faulkner. Larry, welcome. Glad you could be with us.
Thank you, George. Glad to be here.
You started your academic career in 1969 with a PhD at the University of Texas in chemistry, and then joined the chemistry faculty at Harvard. Did you ever envision or anticipate that you would become an academic leader back when you were just a young faculty member?
No, not in the least. I was focused at that time entirely on chemistry, on the subject and on teaching it. My entire vision was that I would stay in scientific research and teaching for my whole career, and that's the way I thought about everything that I did, really, for probably the first 15 years, maybe something on that order. But even my first serious leadership job was head of the chemistry department at the University of Illinois, which was a big job, actually. And but I didn't really think of that as even being in the genre you're talking about here. I mean, it was an extension of what I was doing as a faculty member. And so it was a long time before I thought about it any other way.
You know, you had a very successful academic career, over 120 scientific publications. You're co-author of a textbook in electrochemical methods. I'm sure my students would like to know what changed, what caused you to move from this research and teaching career into academic leadership?
Well, the big moment was one where I was drafted, actually, and even the draft wasn't obvious, obviously going to have any long-term effect when it occurred. We often say, people who reach my age will often tell younger people that the moments in life that actually turn out to have the greatest leverage on your future, you don't even recognize at the time they're happening. And this was one of them. The former president of the University of Texas, Bob Berdahl, was at that time provost of the University of Illinois. And he was, like most provosts, the person who hired deans. We had at that time an opening in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. There was an active search going on. I actually had been a candidate in that search and had been asked, in fact, I'd been invited to take the job. And Bob said, you know, you've sort of come across in this search as not caring whether you get this job or not. And I want you to confront that question seriously and before we talk numbers or any negotiated elements. And so I said, okay. I went away for a couple of days and I came back and I told Bob Berdahl, provost at Illinois at the time, I've decided I don't want that job. And I think it would take me too far away from chemistry. So They went on with the search, by the summer of 1989, by July 19th, I can tell you the date, Bob was in a situation where the search was not complete, but his interim dean was leaving in 2 days. And he needed a dean. So he called me and he said, I need you to be dean till September. I need you to be a dean for 2 months. And well, you can't say no if you're in a situation where you have loyalty to the institution and so forth. And so I said, okay, I'll do that. And I went over there, and actually it turned out I actually really loved the job. I loved being dean of liberal arts and sciences as much as any job I've had. And then 2 months later, I was called into the chancellor's office, the equivalent of the president here. There was a guy named Mort Weir, who was a UT graduate, by the way. And Mort said to me, we're scrubbing the search, you're the dean. And he said, it can be temporary for the rest of the year. This is September, so the rest of the year is the whole year. Or it could be permanent. Which is it? And I said, well, it might as well be permanent. And that was the moment that changed things, because I moved pretty rapidly away from chemistry at that stage. Suddenly, I wasn't just responsible for sciences. I was responsible for the classics and history, and for sociology, and for museums, and for a lot of other things. And it was a little like being an undergraduate again. It was like seeing, I could see very high quality people working in a tremendously broad area. It was very, in a broad set of domains. And gained appreciation for all that they did, and that just was fun. It was fun at a very high level, and so I stayed with it, and that really changed a lot. I did still maintain my chemical research group. I did still teach in chemistry while I was dean of liberal arts and sciences, but it got harder and harder to be effective, and so when I became provost, I gave it up.
As you know, in universities, we don't train academics to be leaders. I mean, there's no courses we offer, we don't do that. How do you acquire the skills then? And how do you go about acquiring those skills to be a leader, especially at the level of a president of a university?
Trial and error, on the job. I think, well, some of it I think is, a lot of leadership has to do with personality, as you know, and quality of judgment and things like that, that aren't necessarily related to having a classic managerial job of any kind. I think serious leadership job at a high level, a dean or a provost or a president of a university, has to have a lot of knowledge that did not come from a chemistry PhD or years of teaching chemistry or any other subject. It comes from other kinds of experiences. Every once in a while I've been asked why so many chemists are presidents of universities, and there are a lot of chemists who are, and I think there's a reason for that. The reason is that chemistry is the largest scale single discipline or single investigator discipline. It's the discipline where the research programs are carried out on the biggest scale with one professor as the central leader. And it's also a physical activity. And so a successful chemist in the highest level academic institutions in the United States is running a pretty good sized research group. That person has to raise the money to pay those people, to furnish their the goods that make the laboratory work, equip the laboratory. The laboratory requires physical space. You have to deal with space management. You have to deal with procurement. You have to deal with personnel. So you have to do all of those things at a larger scale and greater intensity and more sophistication, really, than most faculty members have exposure to.
Sure.
And I think that leads to a development of managerial capabilities in an academic environment. It won't take on everyone, but in the end it took on me.
You know, you mentioned earlier personality. One of the issues we talk about in class is leadership an innate skill or is it a learned skill? Do you have any feelings about that from your observation?
I think I think it's both. I believe that there are talents that people bring to the job from their personalities that, and who knows how those were developed. I won't say those aren't learned to some extent. I'm probably being a chemist, I probably believe some of it's in the DNA. But not all of it is, but it's very fundamental and probably formed in people before they get to college or a professional life. So let's just take it as a set of talents and properties that I think are important. And but beyond that, I think there's a tremendous amount that's learned. I've learned a lot just in practice.
On-the-job training.
Yeah, on-the-job training is absolutely right. And
how would you describe your leadership style? What would be the characteristics in your mind is how you approach leadership? I think one thing that is very important in a leader is the ability to make decisions. A large part of leadership is creating the environment that other people work in. And that environment is partly a matter of motivating people, but it's also creating the set of boundaries that defines the working space. And that creating those boundaries is largely done through decision making. And I think that one thing that I would say is very important in leadership is the ability to make decisions. And I think that's always been a fairly strong aspect of my operational mode. I've never been a person who's been hung up for a long time on decisions. I think it helps a lot the people who are working with you to be able to get things resolved. Yeah. But it's not just to get things resolved because their plans depend on your making a decision. It's that you're making a decision and doing it regularly and reasonably crisply creates an environment of the possible. And one thing that I think is really important is that I've always tried to do is to give people a sense that things are possible. A large organization like the University of Texas, of course, initiative occurs everywhere. You want initiative to be in the departments and in individual students and in individual faculty members and even in the administrative units, you want people to have initiative. You want them to try to make the place better. They have to have a sense that things can happen, that things are possible. And the leaders creating an environment where questions get answered and decisions get made is a part of that. So I think those are things I would say. But the other thing is I think that when people ask me, what is your leadership style, I usually tell them consultative.
What I found, and this was a learned thing, I mean, I can go back and tell you almost when, but a learned thing, that I found that it was that people would give you the ability to make the decision. The organization will grant you the right to make the decision. Even if they disagree with you, even if they don't like the decision you're going to make, they expect you're going to make, they will give you the right to make the decisions if you have talked to the people who are going to be affected and seriously listened to them. And I have generally respected that consistently through my career, and I think it was a rule I developed as a department head in chemistry in a very strong department full of very strong people. I was a head, I wasn't a chair. I was expected to make decisions, and I did, but what I did is to develop the habit of finding the people who would be affected, making sure that I listened to them. I heard them out as to what they thought. And that's different from having a conversation with them. I mean, people can tell whether you're listening to them. And one thing that I would urge this group, you're thinking about this, is to develop the habit of really seriously listening to people. Now, listening does not mean agreeing with. It does not mean respecting everything somebody sets forward. It does not mean incorporating all 10 of their 10-point plan into your program. It means seriously hearing them out to where they can believe with confidence that you actually did hear what they had to say and thought about it. But once you have done that, and you can convey that easily in interpersonal relations, once you've done that, my experience is people will give you the right to make the decisions. Now, of course, the higher up you get in an organization, you get to a place like UT, and I say you got to consult with everybody who's going to be affected. You can't literally do that, but you can consult with the representatives of, the acknowledged representatives of.
You know, I think that style works in business too. From my own experience as dean, when I first became dean, there were external supporters, business people who had a vision for the school and was probably different than my vision.
Yeah.
But visiting with them, listening to them out, explaining, I thought what was so important, if you had a well thought out direction and it made sense, even if they didn't agree with it, they felt confidence in supporting it.
I think that's absolutely right.
Yeah. So I think the qualities you're expressing are not just the university qualities. These are qualities in any large organization.
I agree, and I think they have to do with something very fundamental in human nature. They're not really organizational principles. They just have to do with the way the human social fabric works.
Yeah. I think those are your strengths. So the logical question I have to ask of you is, what do you see as the weaknesses when you were thinking of being a leader? And then how did you address them? Things that you were concerned about, that you thought you might not do as well. And then how do I compensate or work with those areas that I'm not going to do as well with?
Well, I think in my judgment, the hardest thing for me was dealing with the Texas legislature. And it was because I couldn't grasp or make operable political logic. I'm far too much of a Cartesian, you know. I mean, it's you know, scientists are trained that way. If these conditions exist, this follows. In political life, there is a logic, but you can't figure it out because it has to do with connections that exist for this member over here or that member over there on issues that have nothing to do with what you're interested in. So you can't even discern the network. And figuring out how to work with what appears to me to be an illogical system, but not illogical, it has its own logic, as I said, was always really frustrating. And I did have, I think the way I coped with it was to develop some very powerful friends and really to work through them. But in the end, one of the reasons that I decided to leave the presidency of the university was not frustration with that. I mean, sometimes you'll see newspaper stories that say, you know, I just couldn't stand it anymore. Actually, that wasn't really true. But I think that you do burn chips when you're working in the legislative arena, and I reached a stage where I thought the university would be better off with somebody who didn't have as much baggage with key people in the process. And so I think that's an area that I never really felt certainly wasn't a strength. And I think I managed to cope with it by, first of all, always having I think a good reputation in the Capitol for always telling them the truth, whether they wanted to hear it or not. And that, I think, in the end, bought me a lot of goodwill, and that helped. But I don't think I was ever skilled.
Yeah. As you know, a quality that, if you look at surveys of what people think are a great quality of a leader, it's honesty. People just center on that quality of being honest, and dealing with people in that straightforward, honest way is just so valuable. No
I think it's absolutely essential for generations, really. I mean, in academic generations anyway. I've charged search committees. I've done that as department head, as a dean, as a provost, as a president, and the search committee always asks you to give them your list of qualities that are being sought. And I always charge search committees with the 3 I's. And those were integrity, intelligence, and imagination. In that order, integrity first. And I would always tell them that the integrity is so essential because an organization cannot function unless people up and down can trust each other. So integrity is needed at every operational level for good reasons, not just because integrity is a virtue. The organization can't function unless people can believe each other and trust each other.
You know, let's talk about ethics. And you're on the board of some major companies, ExxonMobil, one of the largest companies in the world, as well as a local Austin headquartered company, Temple Inland. So you've had the opportunity to observe business leaders. What do you think are the key ethical issues for public companies today that they need to address? And not talking about the 2 companies you're on the board, but in general terms.
I think that companies need to do a better job of showing the public that they are working in the public interest. Of course, that's not what business law says. That your board tells you. I mean, you're charged by your lawyers when you go on a board with protecting shareholder interest. Mm-hmm. That's it. Period. Essentially, and that largely is a financial bottom line. But I believe that in the end, the well-being of the corporation, it depends dramatically on public acceptance that the corporation is carrying out a function with integrity, a valuable function with integrity. And I think that that's going to be a more important theme. It already is a more important theme than it was a dozen years ago or even 5 years ago. And it's, I think, going to be for some time. So I think the companies need to pay attention to that issue, and they need to make it real. But they also, I think most of them actually do make it real. They just don't spend any time
Sure.
talking to people about that. I think they are going to have to spend more time talking to people about it.
You know, with ExxonMobil being this major energy company, and you're on the board having a fiduciary responsibility to your shareholders for their interest, what do you think is a company's responsibility to society in general? And how do you balance that? Not just this ethical issue, but this broader issue, and an energy company would be environment, would be an issue that would be major to them. How does it all balance?
Well, I think the company's primary social value is creating wealth and employing people. That's the first thing it does, and that you shouldn't lose sight of that. But I think there's more to it. I think that that the business needs to be carried out in a way that respects ethical values that can be expressed. And they probably need to be expressed somewhere in the company's charter documents or its code of business conduct or something. There are several places that it could be, and maybe it ought to be expressed in all of them. But and I think this is tricky ground, of course, because the ethical principles that are going to be expressed won't be everybody's ethical principles. You know, some people have a different political agenda that would create a different set of ethical principles. And what I think is, it would be a mistake for companies to try to feel like they've got to somehow incorporate everybody's principles. But it's not too much for them to think through a set of principles that they do want to respect and try to express that they will respect these things. And obviously the laws of the country, legal behavior, most companies, the ones I'm on, do say that they're going to respect legal behavior. They expect every employee under all circumstances. And, but most of them have ambitions beyond just the purely legal. And I think they probably ought to try to express it somehow. And again, the two companies that I'm associated with do. They have made some considerable attempt to try to tell people what it is they think they're in the business of doing and what are the ethical principles that they want to respect and commit themselves to respect while doing that.
Yeah, the board I'm on, being a mutual fund board, we at each meeting review with the compliance officer whether there were any ethical violations. Does that happen with a firm like ExxonMobil?
Yeah, both ExxonMobil and Timberland. That's part of the work of the audit committees in both cases.
My students actually, one of their assignments is to review the code of ethics, code of conduct of 5 companies. I'm sure one of them did ExxonMobil, maybe one of them did Temple Inlet along the way as well. You know, from being on the board and you've observed business leaders, what do you see as kind of the similarities as well as the differences of leading a large university versus a large corporation?
Well, I think they're totally different enterprises. A university is, and don't laugh when I say this, is a political enterprise. People often do talk about university politics. Henry Kissinger said university politics are so vicious because the stakes are so small. And there's some truth to that. But I'm not really talking about just kind of the interpersonal politics. What I mean is that a corporation is typically a command structure. It's a corporation, the military, federal agencies. I mean, these are command organizations. A leader has the ability to make a major decision, to set a policy, and expect it to be adhered to up and down the organization. In a university, that's not actually the way power is set up. In some spheres, it might be, but a university's set up not to make a bottom line. It's set up to maximize the chance that individuals will achieve at their highest potential. That's what the organizational goal is of universities. Now, you can argue about whether that ought to be the goal, but that is the goal in an American university. And in order to make that possible, you have to give a lot of local autonomy. You have to give them tremendous freedom of decision to individual faculty members and to individual students to pursue things that are of interest to them, to pursue the resources outside the institution that's required to achieve it, to put pressure on to get the space that's needed, to put pressure on to give the courses that support student development in related areas. I mean, all of that stuff requires local decision making, and so you can't have an organization where all the power flows down from the top. And you can't in a corporation either, because you've got to empower the people who are on the line. They're the ones who know the most. Mm-hmm. And so you got to respect that too, but you still just don't have the same hierarchical structure. A university leader, a president of a university or a dean, does a lot by consensus building and jawboning and persuasion. The same skills that are used in the Capitol or in political entities. It's the same set of skills, persuasion, consensus building, that makes it possible for the institution to reach decisions and to move forward. And in a university, the reason for it is to try to maximize the ability of individuals to succeed in a tremendous broad range of fields.
Mm-hmm. As you know, one of the challenges the universities have is you really have to have people who know the culture to lead it. And the great challenge always seems to be is people who are not coming from the culture, trying to step in, who are very good leaders, who do very well, but then trying to step into a university environment, whether it's as a dean or as a president. It's just a tough challenge.
I think it's extremely tough because most of them come from command structures, and they are flabbergasted when people don't take their commands. But beyond that, there are some who succeed.
Let me ask finally, just stepping back in your observation of American companies, what are sort of the key leadership issues you see going on in American companies as far as what should be happening with leaders and people rising up to become leaders, as hopefully many of the students in this class will do?
Well, I think that the U.S. corporate world is pretty ably led, actually. I mean, I think the quality of leadership that I see in the companies that I'm associated with is very high, and the quality of young people coming on is very high. So I don't see that as a weak spot. I do think the world has changed. It's always difficult in any sphere of human activity to make the transition when the world changes, and the world does change in all spheres of activity every once in a while. And I think that we have a somewhat different world here because of what's happened financially, what's happening geopolitically, power shifting in the world in a way that is going to cause American companies to have to think pretty deeply about what they are, what their identity is, whether they're just money-making organizations or whether they have some other more local social purpose. And I believe that that's going to require some serious thinking. But I also think there are sectors where American companies are going to have to perform more competitively in even a tougher competitive environment than they thought they previously had.
Yeah. Those paradigm shifts, when they happen, are, I think, the greatest challenge in some ways of leadership, to recognize them and to think through them, because your modes of operation are all changing.
Right.
And just stepping back and trying to think through that new environment.
Right.
I think those are always the greatest leadership challenges.
I think that's right, but the idea that the CEO is going to figure it all out and tell everybody is the wrong way to think about it. The organization will find ways to adapt if you create an environment where people think things are possible and you encourage them to contribute with concepts that can help you adapt.
Yeah.
The all-wise, the great and powerful Oz at the top of the corporation is probably pretty rare.
Well, it's your turn. So please step up to the mic, and we welcome you to have an opportunity to ask questions. Okay. Julia, if you'd like to go first, please.
All right. Well, my name is Julia Jansen. Hello. My question is concerning ethical dilemma in general. Since there is no right or wrong, I was wondering, when you look back and faced an ethical dilemma, why was it so difficult to solve? How did you solve it? Or by looking back, would you have made a different decision with your sets of principles?
Well, I think there is a right or wrong. I'm a believer that there is, and I think that there are. I think there are difficult decisions where you will have multiple rights in conflict. I think I never had trouble trying to act according to what was right or wrong, even if it got me in conflict with, the types of forces that people often will cite, major donors or other kind of political leaders. I never had trouble deciding for the right if I could clearly discern the right. The problem is that you often have rights in conflict with each other. One path supports this right and another path supports that right. And then you've really got to carefully think through why you're doing what you're doing. But I guess the principle I would tell you, I mean, I won't tell you any particular story. I think I could give you stories, but I think I won't avoid that. But I think that a rule that I believe is valuable in a guide in this is actually to talk to people about it, but never to lose sight of the fact that you have to make the decision. And then in the end, before you go public with the decision, you need to be able to explain to yourself very clearly why you're making that decision, because you're going to be asked that question. And you also need to explain to yourself or work out whether you're going to be able to say publicly the reason. For the most part, you should, I won't say never have a situation where you can't explain the reason. Life is pretty complicated. Sometimes you might not be able to, but for the most part you can, and you shouldn't be afraid to tell people why you decided.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, my name is Jeff Siegel. I was wondering, given that while you were president, you were the head honcho on campus. However, when you went to work with the state legislature, you talked a little bit how it was frustrating. What were some of the differences between leading the group on campus and then going and working with the state legislature, where you were a leader amongst a bunch of other leaders?
Well, you're not a leader amongst them, so you're not a member. You're not a member. You're not a member, and so you're not among them. They may respect you because running a big organization, and this is an organization that that lots of voters are interested in. And so they will be careful dealing with this organization, but you're not one of them, and you can't act as though you are. You're always a reference point for them. Another peculiar thing about Texas law is that no one in the executive side of government, and a university president in effect is a part of the executive side of government, aside from elected officials and those confirmed by the Senate, are allowed to have an opinion on an issue. You are not allowed to advise the legislature as to actions they should take. You are not allowed to testify for or against any piece of legislation. And that hamstrings the executive branch of government in Texas tremendously. The executive branch can't have a program. It can't. The governor can. The controller can. They're elected. The chairman of the Board of Regents can, because the chair is confirmed by the Senate. But a mere president of the University of Texas can't argue for any piece of legislation. When you go down there, you have to fill out a form that you're testifying for, against, or on House Bill 2237, and
Providing information.
You're providing information. You can educate. Now, you can get pretty explicit about where you think wisdom is. And I never really ran into problems with that. But I'm just trying to give you a sense of how the system is set up to hamstring agency heads, agency leaders, and all of that, so they don't come in with too much political strength or argue too forcefully for any piece of legislation. So you're always working with legislators, trying to get the more influential ones to carry things for you, to help with things. They will shape it the way they want to. You have to keep signaling them whether that's you know, too far, too little, or maybe has a problem with this, that, or the other thing. There's staff who do that, but you're not among them. So you're just not. And it's a completely different kind of experience than working with other university leaders.
All right, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Hello, I'm Elwer Bruin. You talked about skills which are particularly important in an academic setting, consensus building, persuasion. Mm-hmm. How important do you think these skills are for you today as you work as a corporate leader?
Oh, those same skills are always valuable anywhere because in many ways command is the last thing you want to do. Sometimes you need to do it because there needs to be a definiteness. I mean, there needs to be, you know, it needs to be clear that the issue is resolved. And in a corporate setting, you may be able to resolve it quicker. You may be able to resolve it with less discussion, less debate, less process. In fact, you certainly can, and that's good. But that doesn't mean there's no phase where when you're discussing among options, the ability to express ideas clearly enough to persuade isn't useful. That's still very useful. I mean, ExxonMobil, the biggest company that I'm on the board of, ExxonMobil has a CEO, chairman and CEO, Rex Tillerson, but the company is actually run by a management committee of 4 people. And that group actively debates issues, strategy, options, threats, and of course the dynamic inside that, the quality of it rests on those 4 people having those skills, as a matter of fact. And then once things are resolved, the effectiveness of the company is going to rest on those folks being able to work those skills as they interact with people outside the management committee and down in the company. I mean, if you can develop those skills, they're always useful.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Well, thank you very much. Please join with me in thanking our guest today for joining with us. Thank you, Larry.
Thanks.
Larry, really appreciate it. And we are adjourned. Hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was good. I enjoyed it. You do a nice job, George.